You think you're building your life based on your own decisions. You think your success or failure is about your effort, your talent, your choices. But here's what's actually happening. You're performing exactly to the level that other people expect from you. And most of those expectations are so low that they're keeping you broke, average, and stuck. There's a psychological principle that explains why some men rise while others stagnate, why some break through every barrier while others hit the same ceiling forever. It's called the Pygmalion Effect, and it's the closest thing to a cheat code for success that exists in human psychology. When people expect more from you, you deliver more. When they expect less, you sink to that level. And right now, the people around you expect very little. But here's where it gets dangerous, where it gets useful, where it becomes the weapon you've been missing. You can manipulate this effect deliberately. You can engineer the expectations around you to create a gravitational pull towards success that makes winning inevitable. In the next hour, I'm going to show you exactly how to weaponize other people's expectations to force yourself into levels of achievement you couldn't reach on willpower alone. How to create social pressure that makes success easier than failure. How to lock yourself into a trajectory where backing down becomes more painful than pushing forward. But first, if you're serious about accessing strategies that actually change your income, your status, your entire position in the social hierarchy, you need to subscribe to Rage Refined right now. Hit that button. Turn on all notifications. Because what we discuss here isn't feel-good motivation. This is tactical psychology. This is how power actually works when you strip away the comfortable lies. Most men waste their lives consuming content that makes them feel better without making them better. They watch, they nod, they agree, and nothing changes. You're here because you're done with that. You're here because you want the real mechanics of transformation. So subscribe now, because the men who hesitate are the same men who wonder why everyone else is winning while they're still stuck explaining why next year will be different. Do it now. Lock in, because the information coming in this channel will separate you from every man who's comfortable with average. Section 1, the invisible force controlling your life. Let's start with the research. In the 1960s, a psychologist named Robert Rosenthal ran an experiment that should terrify you. He went into elementary schools and told teachers that certain students had been identified as intellectual bloomers based on testing. These kids were about to experience massive academic growth. The teachers believed this completely. Here's what the teachers didn't know. The students were selected randomly. There was no test. There was no data. Some kids were just labeled as high potential, and others weren't. But by the end of the year, the randomly selected students actually did perform significantly better. Their IQ scores increased, their grades improved, they outperformed their peers. Why? Because the teachers expected them to. The teachers gave them more attention, more encouragement, more challenging work. They interpreted their mistakes as learning moments instead of failures. They created an environment where high performance was the expected baseline. And the students rose to meet that expectation. Now think about your life. What do the people around you expect from you? Your family, your friends, your colleagues, your partner. Do they expect excellence, or do they expect you to stay exactly where you are? Do they anticipate your breakthrough, or are they comfortable with your current level? Do they see you as someone destined for serious success, or as someone trying hard but probably not making it? Be honest, because their expectations are programming your performance right now. When you're around people who expect little, you unconsciously deliver little. Not because you're weak, but because human beings are social creatures who calibrate their behavior to group expectations. We perform to the level of the environment we're in. This is why men who grow up in high-performing families tend to succeed even if they're not naturally gifted. The expectation is built in. Failure isn't just personal disappointment, it's social deviation. Success isn't celebrated as special, it's expected as normal. And that expectation creates a powerful current that carries them forward even when motivation fades. But most men don't have that advantage. Most men grow up in environments where excellence is suspicious, where ambition is threatening, where success means you're trying to be better than everyone else. And those environments program you for mediocrity. They set expectations so low that achieving them feels like winning, even though you're nowhere near your actual potential. So right now, whether you realize it or not, you're trapped in someone else's expectation system. And if you want to break out, if you want to access levels of success that feel impossible from your current position, you need to deliberately engineer a new expectation environment. You need to weaponize the Pygmalion Effect. Section 2, Engineering Social Pressure. Here's how you start. You make a public declaration, not to everyone, but to specific people whose opinions you care about, people whose respect matters to you, people whose disappointment would hurt. You tell them exactly what you're going to achieve and exactly when you're going to achieve it. This is terrifying because now you've created accountability. Now there are witnesses. Now failure isn't private anymore. And that's exactly the point. You're using fear of social judgment to override your natural tendency toward comfort. You're making it more painful to quit than to continue. But you have to choose your audience carefully. Don't announce your goals to people who secretly want you to fail. Don't share your plans with people who are comfortable with you staying where you are. Don't create accountability with people who give you easy exits and understanding nods when you don't deliver. Choose people who have high standards. Choose people who've achieved what you're trying to achieve. Choose people who will lose respect for you if you quit. Choose people whose disappointment will sting more than the difficulty of following through. This is strategic. This is weaponized social pressure. And then you go further. You create financial stakes. You bet money on your success, real money, enough that losing it would hurt. You use apps and platforms designed for commitment contracts. You lock yourself into consequences that make failure expensive. Why does this work? Because human beings are loss averse. We're more motivated to avoid losing something we have than to gain something we don't. When your goal is just about potential gain, you can rationalize quitting because you're not actually losing anything. But when failure means losing money, losing face, losing the respect of people who matter, suddenly your motivation structure changes completely. You're not relying on willpower anymore. You're relying on social and financial pressure. You're making the path of least resistance point toward success instead of comfort. You're engineering an environment where following through is easier than backing down. Now let's talk about the daily level. You need to surround yourself with people whose expectations pull you upward. This means you might need to change your entire social circle. If you're the most ambitious person in your friend group, you're in the wrong group. If you're the only one taking financial risks, building businesses, reading books, investing in skills, you need different friends. Find men who are where you want to be. Find environments where your current level is below average. Find spaces where people assume you're successful and you have to work to maintain that assumption. This is uncomfortable. This is expensive. This is necessary. Because when you're in a room where everyone's making 6 figures and you're making 40,000, you feel the gap. When you're in conversations about investment strategies and business expansion and you have nothing to contribute, you feel inadequate. And that feeling is useful. That feeling is motivation. That feeling makes you work harder than any inspirational video ever could. Section 3, the identity shift. But here's where most men mess this up. They try to fake it. They try to talk like successful people, dress like successful people, act like successful people. But they're still broke. They're performing an identity they haven't earned. And people sense it. They sense the incongruence. And instead of rising to meet higher expectations, they just become frauds. So you need to understand the correct sequence. You don't announce the identity first. You build evidence first. You stack small wins. You develop skills. You generate results. And then, once you have legitimate proof of progress, you start shifting how you present yourself. You start occupying the identity of someone who's winning because you actually are winning. This is the difference between delusion and strategy. Delusional men tell everyone they're going to be millionaires while living in their parents' basement with no skills and no plan. Strategic men quietly build businesses, develop income streams, acquire assets, and then step into spaces where those achievements are expected and normal. So the Pygmalion Effect isn't about pretending. It's about placing yourself in environments where high performance is required to belong. It's about creating situations where you have to rise or be exposed. It's about making sure the gap between where you are and where people think you are is small enough to be believable, but large enough to pull you forward. Think about it like this. If people expect you to make 50,000 and you're making 40, you'll probably get to 50. If people expect you to make $1 million and you're making 40, you'll probably just feel like a fraud in retreat. But if people expect you to make 80 and you're making 50, that's the sweet spot. That's achievable pressure. That's the zone where expectations pull you forward without crushing you. So you engineer incremental exposure. You don't jump straight into rooms where everyone's making millions. You start in rooms where people are making double what you make. You perform there. You prove yourself there. You let their expectations pull you up. And then you move to the next room and the next. Each time you're surrounding yourself with people whose baseline is your stretch goal. And here's what happens. You become who you're surrounded by. Not because you're weak or impressionable, but because human beings adapt to their environment. Your brain literally rewires itself based on what's normal around you. Your standards shift, your habits shift, your expectations of yourself shift. When everyone around you works out 5 days a week, you start working out 5 days a week. When everyone around you reads constantly, you start reading constantly. When everyone around you has multiple income streams, you start building multiple income streams. Not because you're copying them, but because that's what normal looks like in that environment. This is why geographic arbitrage matters. This is why moving to a new city can change your life. This is why joining the right communities is worth whatever they cost. Because you're not just paying for information, you're paying for a new normal. You're paying for an environment where higher expectations are built into the air you breathe. Section 4, the performance trap. Now here's the danger. The Pygmalion Effect can work against you just as easily as it works for you. When people expect you to fail, when they see you as someone who never finishes anything, when your identity in their eyes is the guy who talks big but delivers small, you'll unconsciously perform to that expectation too. This is why your past failures haunt you, not because of the actual losses, but because they've created an expectation pattern in the people who witness them. Your family remembers the business that didn't work. Your friends remember the goals you quit. Your partner remembers the promises you didn't keep. And now when you start something new, they're not expecting success. They're waiting for the pattern to repeat. And you feel that. You feel their doubt. You feel their skepticism. And it's heavy. It's draining. It makes every action harder because you're not just fighting your own resistance. You're fighting their expectations. You're trying to prove them wrong while they're unconsciously hoping to be proven right so they can say they knew it all along. This is why starting fresh somewhere new is sometimes the only option. Not because you're running away, but because you need to escape the gravitational pull of old expectations. You need to be around people who don't know your history, who don't have a fixed image of who you are, who are willing to accept the new version of you at face value. But if you can't physically relocate, if you can't change your entire social circle, then you need to do something harder. You need to break the patterns so decisively that people's expectations have to update. You need to deliver results so consistently that their skepticism becomes unsustainable. You need to keep promises so reliably that they forget you were ever the guy who quit. This takes time. This takes discipline. This takes showing up every single day even when nobody believes in you. But eventually the evidence overwhelms their doubt. Eventually their expectations shift. Eventually they start assuming you'll succeed instead of assuming you'll fail. And when that shift happens, you feel it. Because suddenly you have wind at your back instead of wind in your face. Here's the tactical part. You need to create undeniable evidence. Not explanations, not promises, evidence. You need visible, measurable progress that people can't argue with. If you're building a business, show revenue. If you're getting in shape, show the transformation. If you're developing a skill, show the results of using that skill. Stop talking about what you're going to do. Stop explaining your process. Stop asking for belief. Just produce evidence. Again and again and again. Until the pattern is so clear that even skeptics have to acknowledge it. Until you've rebuilt your reputation from the ground up. Until people's expectations of you finally match your expectations of yourself. Section 5, manufacturing belief in yourself. Let's talk about the internal game, because the Pygmalion Effect doesn't just work with other people's expectations. It works with your own expectations of yourself. And this is where it gets really powerful. Because if you can engineer an environment where high performance is expected externally and simultaneously build unshakable belief internally, you become unstoppable. But most men have terrible internal expectations. They expect themselves to procrastinate. They expect themselves to quit when things get hard. They expect themselves to choose comfort over growth. And because they expect it, they do it. And then they use that as evidence that their low expectations were correct. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you need to break that cycle. You need to start expecting excellence from yourself, not as a vague hope, but as a baseline assumption. You need to operate as if your success is inevitable, as if high performance is just who you are, as if discipline is your default setting. How do you build this? Through evidence. Again, it comes back to evidence. You make a small promise to yourself and you keep it. You say you're going to wake up at 5 and you wake up at 5. You say you're going to work out and you work out. You say you're going to make 10 sales calls and you make 10 sales calls. And every time you keep a promise to yourself, you're building internal credibility. This is how self-belief actually develops. Not through affirmations, not through visualization, through demonstrated reliability. Through proof that when you say you're going to do something, you do it. Through a track record of keeping commitments even when nobody's watching. And here's what happens. Your internal expectation starts to shift. You start seeing yourself as someone who follows through. You start expecting yourself to succeed because you have a history of succeeding at the things you commit to. And that internal expectation becomes a powerful force. It makes you uncomfortable when you're not performing. It makes mediocrity feel wrong. It makes quitting feel like a violation of your identity. This is the ultimate version of the Pygmalion Effect. When your internal expectation and external expectations align, when everyone, including yourself, expects you to win, you move through the world differently. You take actions that other men won't take because you expect them to work. You persist through obstacles that other men quit at because you expect to overcome them. You bet on yourself in ways that seem reckless to others because you have data that proves you're reliable. But you have to earn this. You can't fake internal belief. You can't trick yourself into confidence. You have to build it through consistent action. Small wins stacked over time until your self-concept is built on rock instead of sand. Until you know, not hope, that you're capable of doing difficult things. Section 6, the strategic announcement. Now let's get tactical about public declarations. When and how should you announce your goals? Because this is where most men either waste the power of social pressure or create pressure that crushes them instead of propelling them. First rule, only announce goals you've already started working on. Don't announce intentions, announce progress. Don't say you're going to start a business. Build it for 3 months, generate your first revenue, and then announce that you're building a business. Don't say you're going to get in shape. Work out for 6 weeks, lose 15 pounds, and then announce your fitness journey. Why? Because announcing too early releases the pressure. You get the dopamine hit of people's encouragement before you've done the work. You get validation for intention instead of action. And your brain treats that validation as success, which reduces your motivation to actually execute. But when you announce after you've already built momentum, the dynamic is different. Now you're not seeking encouragement, you're creating accountability. Now people aren't congratulating you for having a dream. They're watching to see if you continue. Now the pressure is to maintain and expand what you've started, not to start something you've only talked about. Second rule, announce to the right people at the right time. If you're building something that will take years, don't announce it publicly until you have undeniable results. But do announce it to a small circle of high performers who can hold you accountable. Make it specific, make it measurable, make it time-bound. Tell them exactly what you're building, exactly how much money you're going to generate, exactly what date you're going to hit that number, and then give them permission to call you out if you're not tracking. This creates a different kind of pressure. This creates adult accountability instead of social media dopamine. Third rule, use progressive disclosure. You don't announce everything at once. You announce milestones as you hit them. You let people see your trajectory through achievements, not promises. This does two things. It builds credibility because you're proving you can execute, and it builds momentum because each announcement creates new expectations for the next level. Think about how companies launch products. They don't announce everything up front. They tease, they beta test, they release to early adopters, they build proof of concept, and then they launch publicly. You should treat your life the same way. You're constantly in beta, constantly testing, constantly building evidence, and you share that evidence strategically to create pulling forces toward your next level. Fourth rule, never explain failures publicly. If you miss a goal, if you don't hit a timeline, if something doesn't work, you handle that privately with the people who are actually invested in your success. You don't post about it. You don't make excuses. You just quietly adjust and keep moving. Why? Because public failure resets expectations. It gives people permission to doubt you again. It turns your journey into entertainment for people who aren't actually rooting for you. And it wastes energy that should be going into solving the problem instead of explaining the problem. Section 7, becoming inevitable. So what's the end game here? What happens when you successfully weaponize the Pygmalion Effect? You become inevitable. You create a situation where your success is overdetermined, where so many forces are pushing you forward that failure would require more effort than winning. Think about it. You've surrounded yourself with people who expect excellence. You've created financial stakes that make quitting expensive. You've built internal evidence that proves you're reliable. You've made public commitments that create social pressure. You've joined environments where high performance is required just to belong. You've stacked so many forcing functions that the path of least resistance points directly toward your goals. This is how powerful men operate. They don't rely on motivation. They don't hope they'll feel inspired. They engineer circumstances that make success more likely than failure. They build systems that pull them forward even on days when they don't want to move. And here's what that looks like practically. You wake up and you don't need to decide whether to work out because you've told people you work out 5 days a week and it's day 3. You don't need to decide whether to make sales calls because you've committed to a revenue target and you're being watched. You don't need to decide whether to read because you're in a community where everyone reads and you'll look stupid if you haven't. The decisions are already made. The expectations are already set. The pressure is already applied. You just have to show up and execute. And execution becomes easier than resistance because resistance means disappointing people, losing money, breaking your identity, and admitting you're not who you said you were. This is the ultimate freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom from internal conflict. The freedom that comes from alignment between your environment, your commitments, your identity, and your actions. The freedom that comes from knowing exactly what you're supposed to do and having powerful reasons to do it. You're not fighting yourself anymore. You're not negotiating with yourself every morning about whether today's the day you finally take action. You're just moving. Because movement is what's expected. Because stillness is what's punished. Because everything in your life is designed to pull you towards success. So here's what you do next. Today, not tomorrow. Today, you identify one goal that matters, one thing that would significantly change your life if you achieved it, and you create a forcing function around it. You announce it to 3 people whose respect you care about. You put money on it. You join a community where that achievement is normal. You create a timeline. You build in consequences for failure. You engineer a situation where following through is easier than quitting. And then you start producing evidence. Small wins, daily progress, proof that you're moving. You don't wait for motivation. You don't wait to feel ready. You move because the pressure is on, the expectations are set, and backing down is more painful than pushing forward. This is how you use the Pygmalion Effect, not as a theory, not as an interesting psychological principle, but as a tactical weapon for forcing yourself into levels of success you couldn't reach on willpower alone. Subscribe to Rage Refined if you haven't already, because this channel is where men learn the real mechanics of power. Not the comfortable lies, not the motivational speeches, the actual systems that separate men who achieve from men who wish. You just learned how to weaponize expectations. Now go engineer your environment. Now go create the pressure. Now go become inevitable, and do it quietly, because powerful men don't announce their strategies. They just execute them while everyone else is still deciding whether to start.